April 11, 1951. President Harry Truman sits alone in the Oval Office, a single piece of paper before him. Outside, General Douglas MacArthur commands 500,000 men in Korea, celebrated as America's greatest living soldier. Inside, Truman holds a pen that will end that command with a single signature. The room is silent, except for the ticking of a clock. Truman's hand trembles slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he's about to do. No president has ever fired a general this popular, this powerful, this legendary. MacArthur has won wars, rebuilt nations, and captured the imagination of millions. Truman? He's a failed haberdasher from Missouri that nobody wanted as president. But in this moment, Truman says something that reveals the true nature of American democracy. Words so powerful they would define civil-military relations for generations. Words that would either save the Constitution or destroy his presidency. What did Truman say? And why did this decision nearly tear America apart? The relationship between Truman and MacArthur had been deteriorating for months, but the final breaking point came in March 1951. MacArthur had done the unthinkable. He'd issued his own unauthorized statement on potential peace negotiations with China, directly contradicting official U.S. policy and undermining Truman's diplomatic efforts. Truman had been preparing a presidential announcement offering to negotiate an end to the Korean War. It was carefully crafted, cleared with allies, designed to test whether China and North Korea were willing to discuss terms. Then MacArthur, from his headquarters in Tokyo, issued his own statement threatening to expand the war into China, essentially daring the Chinese to surrender or face annihilation. It was insubordination on a scale rarely seen in American history. MacArthur wasn't just disagreeing with policy. He was making his own policy, conducting his own foreign relations, treating the President of the United States as an irrelevant obstacle to his strategic vision. But this wasn't the first incident. For months, MacArthur had been pushing boundaries, making public statements that contradicted administration policy, demanding permission to bomb Chinese bases in Manchuria, advocating for the use of nationalist Chinese troops from Taiwan, and even hinting at the use of atomic weapons. Each time, Truman had exercised restraint, hoping MacArthur would fall in line. The final straw came when Republican Congressman Joseph Martin read aloud on the House floor a letter from MacArthur criticizing Truman's limited war strategy. "There is no substitute for victory," MacArthur had written, a direct rebuke to the president's policy of containment rather than all-out war with China. Truman called an emergency meeting with his top advisors, Secretary of State Dean Acheson, Secretary of Defense George Marshall, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Omar Bradley, and Special Counsel Averell Harriman. The question wasn't whether MacArthur had crossed the line. Everyone agreed he had. The question was whether Truman had the political courage to do what had to be done. Marshall, himself a five-star general and the architect of victory in World War II, spoke gravely. "Mr. President, as a soldier, I can tell you that General MacArthur's actions constitute insubordination. As a citizen, I can tell you that relieving him will cost you dearly." Bradley added that all the Joint Chiefs agreed MacArthur had to go, that military discipline required it. Truman sat quietly, listening to each advisor. Then he spoke the words that would define his presidency. Truman looked at his advisors and said something that revealed his core belief about American democracy. "I don't care how popular he is. I don't care how many wars he's won. The president is commander-in-chief, not the general. If I let MacArthur make foreign policy, then the military runs the country, not the elected government. That's not how this republic works." He continued, his voice growing stronger. "The Constitution is clear. Civilian authority over the military. Always. Not when it's convenient. Not when the general agrees with the president. Always. If we lose that principle, we lose everything that makes America different from every dictatorship and military regime in the world." Truman then said something that would become legendary. "MacArthur thinks he's bigger than the office of the presidency. He's not. No general is. No matter how many stars he wears or how many victories he's won. The buck stops here, and I'm the one sitting at this desk." The decision was made, but the execution had to be handled carefully. MacArthur was in Tokyo, governing Japan and commanding forces in Korea. He deserved to hear the news officially, not from press reports. But there was a problem. The White House was leaking like a sieve, and journalists were already sniffing around the story. Truman wanted MacArthur to receive official notification before the press broke the story. He ordered a coded message sent to Secretary of the Army Frank Pace, who was visiting Korea, instructing him to fly to Tokyo and personally deliver the dismissal order to MacArthur. But technology intervened in unexpected ways. A wire service reporter got wind of the story. The news was about to break. Truman faced a choice: let MacArthur learn of his firing from news reports, or release the announcement immediately, even though MacArthur hadn't been officially notified. Truman chose to release the statement at 1 a.m, Washington time, hoping it would reach MacArthur before the press did. It didn't. MacArthur learned of his dismissal from a radio news bulletin while hosting a luncheon in Tokyo. The insult was unintentional, but devastating. The greatest general of his generation, a man who had served his country for over 50 years, heard he was fired from a news broadcast. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. MacArthur was beloved by millions of Americans who saw him as the embodiment of military greatness and unwavering strength against communism. Truman, by contrast, was deeply unpopular. His approval ratings already in the basement due to the Korean War's grinding stalemate and accusations of being soft on communism. Telegrams poured into the White House by the thousands, running 20-1 against Truman's decision. Republican senators called it appeasement of communism. Senator Joseph McCarthy, already riding high on anti-communist hysteria, declared that Truman must be either incompetent or a traitor. Senator William Jenner went further, calling for Truman's impeachment. Newspapers across the country ran editorials condemning the decision. The Los Angeles Times called it one of the most tragic and far-reaching decisions in American history. The Chicago Tribune, never a Truman supporter, declared it an insult to the intelligence of the American people. Even some Democrats privately questioned whether Truman had committed political suicide. Truman was burned in effigy in towns across America. Protesters gathered outside the White House with signs reading, "Dismiss Truman, restore MacArthur," and "We want MacArthur back." Some state legislatures passed resolutions condemning the firing. The Gallup poll showed 69% of Americans sympathized with MacArthur, while only 29% supported Truman. But Truman didn't waver. In a nationwide radio address, he explained his decision to the American people. "I believe that we must try to limit the war to Korea for these vital reasons: to make sure that the precious lives of our fighting men are not wasted, to see that the security of our country and the free world is not needlessly jeopardized, and to prevent a third world war." He continued, "Full-scale attack on China would probably bring the Soviet Union into the war. It would spread the conflict and might well lead to atomic warfare. Our aim is to avoid the spread of the conflict. We are trying to prevent a world war, not to start one." Truman's words were clear and principled, but America wasn't listening. They wanted their hero back, and they were furious at the man who had taken him away. MacArthur's return to America after 14 years abroad became a spectacle unlike anything the nation had seen. He arrived to a hero's welcome that dwarfed celebrations for returning World War II commanders. 7.5 million people lined the streets of San Francisco, New York, and Washington to see him. It was the largest public reception in American history. On April 19, 1951, MacArthur addressed a joint session of Congress in one of the most dramatic speeches in American political history. The chamber was packed, with Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, senators, and representatives all present. The entire nation listened on radio. MacArthur defended his conduct and criticized the limited war strategy. "In war, there is no substitute for victory," he declared, the phrase that would become his legacy and his indictment of Truman's approach. He spoke of his love for country, his decades of service, and his belief that America was fighting with one hand tied behind its back. Then came the emotional conclusion: "I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye." Many in the chamber wept openly. It seemed MacArthur had won the public relations battle completely. Truman watched the speech on television from the White House. Aides reported he remained expressionless, occasionally making sarcastic comments. When MacArthur finished, Truman simply said, "Nothing but a bunch of damn bullshit." He knew MacArthur's speech was effective theater, but he also believed history would vindicate his decision. The MacArthur phenomenon dominated American politics for weeks. He spoke at rallies, gave interviews, and was courted by Republicans as a potential presidential candidate. For a moment it seemed Truman had made a catastrophic error, that firing MacArthur would be remembered as the decision that destroyed his presidency and perhaps even changed American foreign policy. But then something unexpected happened. The public began to hear the other side of the story. The Senate Armed Services Committee and Foreign Relations Committee held joint hearings on MacArthur's dismissal, and the testimony changed public opinion dramatically. General Omar Bradley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, delivered devastating testimony that would turn the tide. Bradley explained that MacArthur's strategy of expanding the war into China would be the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. All 5 members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff agreed that MacArthur's dismissal had been necessary and that his proposed strategy was reckless. Even officers who admired MacArthur personally testified that he had overstepped his authority. The hearings revealed something the public hadn't fully understood. MacArthur hadn't just disagreed with policy, he'd actively worked to undermine it. He'd refused direct orders. He'd conducted his own foreign policy. He'd threatened to expand a limited war into a global conflict that could trigger World War III and nuclear exchanges. Public opinion began to shift. The initial outrage cooled as Americans understood the constitutional principle at stake. Truman's approval ratings remained low, but history began to view his decision differently. MacArthur's political career never materialized. His speech to the Republican National Convention in 1952 fell flat, and he faded from public life just as he'd predicted, but with less grace than he'd hoped. Truman left office in 1953 with approval ratings in the 20s, one of the most unpopular presidents in history. But over time, historians would rank his decision to fire MacArthur as one of the most important acts of presidential courage in American history. He had preserved the constitutional principle of civilian control of the military at tremendous personal cost. What Truman said in that moment of decision, "The buck stops here," and his unwavering commitment to civilian authority, established a precedent that has governed civil-military relations ever since. No general, no matter how popular or successful, is above the Constitution. No military officer makes foreign policy. The president commands, the generals obey. MacArthur was right that Asia would be the battleground of the Cold War. But Truman was right that the Constitution mattered more than any general's strategic vision. If you want to explore more stories of military leadership, presidential courage, and the decisions that shaped modern America, subscribe now for deeper dives into the legends who changed history.